Hi everyone. Welcome to Lunar Sleeping Studio. Rain fell in a patient, steady rhythm, the kind that softened the world instead of scaring it, tapping gently against stone walls, whispering through darkened trees, and sighing along the empty road that curved toward the kingdom. Night had settled fully, wrapping the land in deep blue shadows, when a lone figure appeared through the curtain of rain. She walked slowly, her cloak heavy with water, her shoes thin and worn, each step splashing softly as if she were afraid to disturb the sleeping earth. Lightning flickered far away, just enough to reveal her face for a moment, pale, tired, but steady, with eyes that held a quiet strength rather than fear. The castle gates stood tall and closed, their iron dark with rust and rain. She lifted her hand and knocked, the sound small but determined. For a long moment, there was only the rain answering her. Then a torch flared above, casting warm light downward, and a guard leaned out, squinting into the storm. "Who comes at this hour?" he called, his voice rough from sleep. "A traveler," she replied, her voice calm despite the cold creeping into her bones. "I seek shelter for the night." The guard hesitated, studying her soaked cloak, her muddy hem, the way she stood straight even while shivering. He called for the gate to be opened, and with a low groan, the doors parted just enough to let her slip inside. Warmth rushed toward her, smelling of wood smoke and bread, and for a moment she nearly forgot the ache in her feet. Inside, servants paused in their work, surprised by the sight of the stranger. One whispered, "She looks like a beggar," while another frowned and said, "Look at her posture." Not everyone who arrives in the rain is what they seem. The woman heard them but said nothing, only clasped her wet cloak tighter and waited. The queen appeared at the far end of the hall, tall and composed, her eyes sharp with curiosity. She stepped closer, her silk dress brushing the stone floor. "You are far from home," the queen said, her tone gentle but testing. "Who are you, truly?" The traveler met her gaze without flinching. "I am a princess," she said simply. "Storm stole my carriage, and the road swallowed my guards. All I ask is a bed and a roof until morning." A quiet ripple moved through the hall. Some servants hid smiles, others rolled their eyes. The queen's lips curved into a thoughtful line. "A princess," she repeated softly, as if tasting the word. "Very well. Tonight, you shall be our guest." The traveler was led down a corridor lit by flickering candles, the rain still murmuring outside the windows like a lullaby. She was given warm bread and soup, and as she ate, her hands stopped trembling. The queen watched her closely, noting the way she thanked the servants, the way she sat upright even when exhausted, the way her eyes softened at kindness. Later, as the castle grew quiet and the rain deepened into a steady hush, the queen prepared a bed unlike any other. She placed a single pea upon the mattress, then covered it with layer after layer of soft bedding, until the bed looked impossibly comfortable. "We shall see," the queen murmured to herself, smoothing the blankets. The traveler was shown to the room, the fire glowing low, the bed inviting and warm. She smiled politely, unaware of the small green secret hidden beneath the softness. As she lay down, the rain outside slowed, tapping gently, as if waiting too. Sleep came slowly. She turned once, then again, a faint discomfort stirring beneath her rest. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply, telling herself that storms pass, roads change, and morning always comes. Outside, the rain continued its patient song, wrapping the castle in silence. Somewhere beneath layers of feather and cloth, a single pea pressed quietly, waiting to reveal what the night would uncover. Morning arrived gently, not with trumpets or shouting, but with the soft thinning of rain and a pale light slipping through the tall windows. The storm had not ended completely. It had only grown quieter, as if it respected the stillness of the castle at dawn. Drops clung to the glass like tiny memories of the night before. In the guest chamber, the traveler stirred long before the bells rang. She had not slept well. Each time her body relaxed, a strange discomfort tugged her back toward waking. It was not pain exactly, more like a persistent reminder that something beneath her did not belong. She sat up slowly, pushing aside the heavy blankets, her brow creased not with anger, but confusion. The bed looked perfect, untouched, luxurious beyond anything she had known in months. Yet her body felt as if it had rested on uneven ground. She pressed her palm against the mattress, testing it, then shook her head with a quiet, almost embarrassed smile. "I must be more tired than I thought," she whispered to herself. Still, when she rose, her movements were stiff, and she rubbed her back as if the night had weighed heavier than it should have. Down the corridor, servants were already awake. Fires were being rekindled, bread sliced, kettles set to boil. When the traveler entered the hall, wrapped now in a borrowed shawl, several heads turned. One maid leaned toward another and murmured, "She looks like she wrestled the bed all night." The other replied softly, "Or the bed wrestled her." The queen stood near the window, watching the last of the rain slide down into the garden. She turned as she heard footsteps. "Good morning," she said, her voice calm and observant. "I trust you rested well?" The traveler hesitated, then chose honesty over pride. "Your Majesty," she said gently, "the bed was warm and generous, yet I confess, I felt as though I slept upon something hard. I turned all night and could not find true rest." The room went quiet. A servant stifled a laugh. Another raised an eyebrow. The queen, however, did not smile. Her eyes sharpened, not with suspicion now, but interest. She stepped closer. "Something hard?" she asked. "Through all those mattresses?" "Yes," the traveler replied, lowering her gaze slightly. "It sounds foolish, I know. I do not wish to complain." The queen studied her for a long moment, noting there was no accusation in her tone, no demand, no entitlement, only a simple statement of experience. "You may join us for breakfast," the queen said at last. "We will speak more then." At the table, warm light spilled across polished wood as plates were set down. The smell of fresh bread and honey filled the air. The traveler ate slowly, gratefully, savoring each bite. The prince, who had remained quiet the night before, watched her from across the table. He noticed how she listened more than she spoke, how she smiled when spoken to but did not push herself forward. "So," he said at last, curiosity edging his voice, "you claim royal blood, yet you arrive alone, soaked in rain, without jewels or guards." She met his gaze calmly. "Storms do not ask permission," she replied. they take what they will. Titles do not stop the wind. The prince leaned back, thoughtful. He had met many who claimed importance loudly. This one carried it like a quiet burden. After breakfast, the queen dismissed the servants and turned to the prince. "Appearances deceive," she said softly. "We will not rush our judgment." Meanwhile, the traveler was offered dry clothes and a chance to rest by the fire. As she sat, warmth slowly returning to her limbs, memories drifted through her mind: long roads, closed gates, faces that doubted before listening. She had learned that true gentleness often came wrapped in trials. In the guest chamber, unseen by all, the bed was being stripped. Layer by layer, servants lifted the mattresses, until one paused. "Your Majesty," he called quietly. The queen entered, and there, resting alone on the wooden frame, lay the small green pea. The queen did not speak at once. She picked it up between her fingers, light as nothing, yet heavy with meaning. Outside, the rain finally stopped, leaving the world clean and expectant. Back in the hall, the traveler gazed out the window, unaware that the castle itself was beginning to see her clearly, not as a stranger in the rain, but as a soul tested by discomfort, revealed by honesty, and quietly preparing to change the fate of everyone within those stone walls. The rain had ended, but its presence still lingered in the air, clinging to the stones of the castle and the leaves of the garden as if unwilling to let go of the night it had shaped. Clouds drifted slowly apart, allowing thin strands of sunlight to touch the courtyard for the first time in days. The traveler stood near the tall window, watching servants sweep away fallen petals and puddles, her thoughts moving as quietly as the clouds above. Behind her, the queen and the prince entered the chamber. Their footsteps were unhurried, deliberate. She turned at once, offering a respectful bow, unaware of the small green truth resting in the queen's closed palm. The queen studied her face carefully, no fear, no calculation, only a tired grace that had not faded even after a restless night. "You said the bed troubled you," the queen began, her voice measured. "Tell me more." Not as a guest, but as a woman speaking to another. The traveler paused, choosing her words with care. "I have slept on stone floors and in forests where roots press against the spine," she said softly. "Hardship teaches the body many things. But last night felt different. It was as if the smallest thing demanded my attention, refusing to be ignored." The prince felt a strange tightening in his chest. Many would have laughed at such a complaint, yet the way she spoke carried no exaggeration. The queen opened her hand and revealed the pea. "This," she said simply. The traveler's eyes widened, not in shock, but recognition. She took a slow breath, as if the night suddenly made sense. "Then I am not mad," she whispered. The prince stepped closer. "You felt that, through all the betting?" She nodded. "Sensitivity is not always weakness," she replied quietly. "Sometimes it is how truth survives." Silence settled between them, thick and thoughtful. The queen closed her fingers again and turned toward the window. "Many believe royalty is measured by crowns and comfort," she said. "But true nobility often reveals itself in how deeply one feels, how honestly one speaks." The traveler lowered her gaze, her voice gentle but steady. "If my words displease you, I will leave at once. I never wished to prove anything. The queen turned back, eyes softened now. "You have proven more than you know," she said. "You will stay." Word began to spread through the castle, carried in whispers along corridors and staircases. Servants paused in their duties, exchanging glances. "She felt a pea?" One muttered. Another replied, "Only someone raised in care and awareness could notice such a thing." Skepticism mixed with wonder, but curiosity grew stronger than doubt. Later, the traveler was invited into the garden. The earth smelled fresh, reborn after rain. She walked slowly along the paths, fingers brushing damp roses. The prince accompanied her, keeping a respectful distance at first. "You speak as if you have known hardship," he said. She smiled faintly. "Royal roads are not always smooth," she answered. "Sometimes they disappear altogether." He considered this. "And yet you remain gentle." "Gentleness is not the absence of strength," she said. "It is strength choosing not to shout." They stopped beside a small fountain, water rippling softly. For the first time, the prince laughed not loudly, but with surprise. "You are unlike anyone who has passed these gates," he admitted. As evening approached, clouds returned, not with rain, but with a quiet promise of night. The traveler was given a seat at supper once more, no longer as a question, but as a presence. The queen watched the way she listened, the way she spoke to servants as equals, the way she thanked even for small kindnesses. In her chamber that night, the traveler lay down once more, this time on an ordinary bed. Sleep came easily. Outside, the castle stood silent, holding a secret lesson within its walls that truth does not announce itself with noise, that worth is often hidden, and that sometimes the smallest things reveal the greatest hearts. Night settled again over the kingdom, calm and untroubled, as if the storm that had passed had taken all unrest with it. A faint breeze moved through the open windows, carrying the scent of wet earth and blooming flowers. The traveler slept deeply, her breathing slow and even, her face finally free of the strain that had followed her for so long. When morning arrived, it found her renewed, though the quiet weight of uncertainty still rested somewhere in her chest. She awoke to distant footsteps and the soft clink of dishes being arranged in the hall. For a moment, she lay still, listening. No discomfort pulled at her body now, no invisible pressure demanded her attention. She rose and dressed carefully, smoothing the simple gown she had been given, her movements graceful despite its plainness. In the council chamber, the queen sat with a small group of advisors. Their voices were low but tense. "One night proves nothing," one said. "Sensitivity can be learned." Another shook his head. "Or performed." The queen lifted her hand, silencing them. "Then we will observe," she said. "Not test. Observe. True nature reveals itself over time." The traveler was invited to join them for the day not as an honored guest, but not as a servant either. She moved through the castle freely, allowed to see its workings. In the kitchens, she thanked the cooks and asked about their families. In the armory, she listened with interest rather than fear. Everywhere she went, her presence softened the space, like light passing through cloud. The prince watched from a distance. He noticed how she paused to help a maid lift a basket, how she listened when an old gardener spoke of soil and seasons, how she never once reminded anyone of who she claimed to be. Her actions spoke quietly, but they echoed. At midday, they shared a simple meal in the garden. Sunlight danced across the table, catching on glass and leaves. "Do you miss your home?" the prince asked. She considered the question carefully. "I miss the idea of safety," she replied. "Home is not always a place. Sometimes it is a promise you carry until you find where it belongs." The words stayed with him long after she finished speaking. That afternoon, a child from the nearby village was brought into the courtyard, injured from a fall. Panic stirred, voices rising. Without hesitation, the traveler knelt beside the child, her hands steady, her voice soothing. She tore a strip from her sleeve to bind the wound, speaking gently until the tears slowed and then stopped. "Fear hurts more than pain," she murmured, brushing dirt from the child's hair. The queen watched from the balcony above, her expression unreadable, but something within her shifted. This was no performance. Kindness like that did not wait for approval. As evening came, clouds gathered again, but this time they carried only shadow, not rain. The castle felt different now, less guarded, more awake. At supper, laughter surfaced softly, naturally, surprising everyone. Later, alone by the window, the traveler gazed out at the darkening sky. Doubt still whispered to her. She did not know how long she would be allowed to stay, or what judgment awaited her. Yet she felt, for the first time in a long while, that she did not need to prove her worth. In the quiet corridors, the queen spoke to the prince in a low voice. "Royalty is not a test passed in one night," she said. "It is a way of moving through the world." The prince nodded, his eyes thoughtful. Somewhere deep within the castle, a lesson was taking root that true nobility reveals itself not under pressure alone, but in patience, humility, and compassion, day after day, when no one is watching. The fifth night approached quietly, without ceremony, yet something in the air felt expectant, as though the castle itself were holding its breath. Lamps were lit earlier than usual, their warm glow stretching along the corridors, softening the stone walls that had witnessed generations of judgment and pride. Outside, clouds gathered once more, not heavy enough to rain, but thick enough to dim the stars. The traveler stood at a window, watching the sky darken, her reflection faint in the glass, her thoughts deeper than the shadows beyond. She had been in the castle several days now, long enough for curiosity to turn into familiarity, and familiarity into quiet attachment. Yet she knew how easily doors could close again. Belonging, she had learned, was often temporary. That evening, the queen invited her to walk through the eastern wing, a place rarely opened to guests. The corridor was lined with portraits, men and women painted in regal poses, eyes proud, distant, untouchable. The traveler slowed her steps, studying the faces. "They look lonely," she said softly. The queen glanced at her. "Power often is," she replied. They stopped before a faded portrait of a young queen, her crown too large for her head, her expression uncertain. "She ruled wisely," the queen said. "But she never trusted herself. She believed she had to become harder to be respected." The traveler nodded. "Many confuse hardness with strength," she said. "But hardness breaks. Strength bends." The queen said nothing, but her silence carried weight. Later, during supper, a noble woman visiting from a neighboring land openly questioned the traveler. "You speak beautifully," she said with a thin smile, "but words are easy. Sensitivity, kindness, these are luxuries of safety. Can you endure loss without becoming bitter?" The room grew still. The traveler set down her cup gently. "Loss taught me to listen," she replied. "Bitterness closes the ears. I chose not to go deaf." The noble woman laughed softly, uncertain whether she had been answered or dismissed. As night deepened, the prince walked with the traveler through the courtyard. Lanterns swayed slightly in the breeze. "They test you without calling it a test," he said quietly. She smiled, tired but peaceful. "Life has done worse." He stopped walking. "Does it hurt?" he asked. "Being doubted again and again?" She met his eyes. "Only when I forget who I am," she said. "And I am learning not to." Thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, too far to threaten, close enough to remind. When she retired to her chamber, she paused at the doorway, running her fingers along the wood, grounding herself. The bed was simple again, honest. She lay down without fear, sleep finding her quickly. Elsewhere, the queen sat alone, turning the small green pea in her hand once more. She thought of all the trials she herself had endured, all the moments she had hardened instead of listened. She placed the pea back into a small velvet pouch and closed it carefully, as one might close a chapter. Morning would come soon. With it, decisions. But tonight, as the castle rested under a veiled sky, something rare was happening, not a test being passed, not a claim being proven, but a truth being quietly accepted. Dawn crept in softly, as if unwilling to interrupt the fragile calm that had settled over the castle. Pale light slipped through the arches and windows, touching the floors in long, gentle bands. The air felt cooler that morning, carrying the distant scent of damp fields and awakening earth. The traveler woke before the bells, her eyes opening with a sense of quiet resolve rather than uncertainty. She dressed slowly, tying the ribbon at her sleeve with careful hands. In the mirror, she barely recognized the woman she saw, not because she looked different, but because she felt steadier. The ache of wandering had not vanished, but it had softened, like a wound finally allowed to heal. In the great hall, the queen and prince were already gathered with several nobles. Their voices hushed when the traveler entered. She sensed it immediately. The air carried weight, the kind that precedes judgment. She straightened her shoulders, not in defense, but in readiness. The queen gestured for her to come forward. "Today," she said calmly, "you will ride with us to the outer villages." A murmur rippled through the room. Nobles did not often leave the safety of stone walls, especially with a guest whose place was still uncertain. The traveler inclined her head. "I would be honored," she said. The road beyond the castle was uneven, marked by recent storms. As they rode, the traveler watched fields and cottages pass by, her gaze attentive, absorbing. When they reached the first village, they found broken fences, flooded paths, and weary faces. Children stared openly. Some bowed. Others simply watched. The queen dismounted, surprised by the traveler doing the same without hesitation. Together, they walked among the villagers. The traveler listened, truly listened to their worries, lost crops, sick animals, fear of the coming winter. She asked no grand questions, offered no empty promises, but her presence eased the tension, like a hand placed gently on a trembling shoulder. At one cottage, an old woman wept over a collapsed roof. Without a word, the traveler knelt beside her, helping gather what could be saved. Mud stained her dress. She did not notice. The prince watched closely. This was no courtly performance. There was no audience to impress, no reward promised. Only compassion in motion. By the time they returned to the castle, the sun was low and golden. Dust and fatigue clung to them all. During supper, the nobles were quieter than usual, their earlier doubts unsettled by what they had seen. Later, as evening shadows lengthened, the traveler stood once more by the window. Her body was tired, but her spirit felt awake. The prince joined her. "You never asked for gratitude," he said. She smiled faintly. "Help is not a trade," she replied. "It loses its meaning when it expects return." In her chamber that night, she slept deeply again. No storms, no discomfort, only the steady rhythm of her breath. Elsewhere, the queen walked the halls alone, pausing beneath the portraits. For the first time in years, she felt hope not loud, not triumphant, but real. The castle, too, seemed changed. Its walls held not just stone and history, but the quiet understanding that true worth is revealed not in comfort or claim, but in how one steps into the world when no test is announced and no crown is at stake. The seventh night brought a deeper quiet than the ones before it, the kind of silence that settles only after truths have begun to surface. The castle lamps burned low, their flames steady, no longer flickering as if unsure of their place. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees, brushing leaves together in a soft, rhythmic hush that felt almost like breathing. The traveler sat alone in her chamber, hands folded in her lap, staring at the small crackling fire. Her body ached from the day's journey to the villages, but it was a good ache, honest and earned. Still, her mind wandered. She knew kindness alone did not decide fate in places built on lineage and tradition. Acceptance could be fragile. Belonging could be withdrawn. A quiet knock sounded at the door. She rose at once. When she opened it, the prince stood there, not in formal attire, but dressed simply, as if he had stepped out of his role for a moment. "May I come in?" he asked. She nodded, stepping aside. He entered slowly, glancing at the room, then at her. "You didn't have to come with us today," he said. "Many wouldn't have." She returned to her seat. "Many could," she replied softly. "They just don't." He considered her words, then sat across from her. For a moment, neither spoke. The fire filled the silence. "I've spent my life surrounded by people who tell me who they are," he said finally. "Few ever show it." She looked at him, her gaze steady. "Showing takes time," she said. "And patience. Both are expensive." He smiled faintly, then grew serious again. "If you were never accepted here," he asked, "would you regret coming?" She paused. The question reached deeper than he likely intended. "No," she answered. "Because this place reminded me that I am still myself, no matter where I stand." The prince exhaled slowly, as if releasing a thought he had been carrying for days. "I think the castle is changing," he said. "And so am I." When he left, the traveler remained by the fire for a long while, watching embers shift and glow. She felt something unfamiliar, not hope exactly, but possibility. Possibility was more dangerous than hope. It asked you to stay open. The next morning arrived with a pale sky, neither bright nor heavy. The traveler joined the household early, helping in small ways, unnoticed by most. But one servant saw everything. Later, whispers moved again through the halls, different now, not questioning, but wondering. That afternoon, a messenger arrived from a neighboring kingdom, bringing news of an upcoming royal gathering. The castle stirred with preparation and anxiety. Such gatherings were stages where worth was judged harshly and publicly. In the council chamber, voices rose. "She cannot attend," one noble argued. "Her status is unconfirmed." The queen listened without interruption. Then she spoke, her voice firm. "She will attend," she said. "Not as proof, as presence." When the traveler was told, she lowered her eyes. "I do not wish to cause division," she said. "You didn't," the queen replied. "You revealed it." That night, as darkness wrapped the castle once more, the traveler lay awake briefly, listening to the wind. She did not know what awaited her beyond these walls, among strangers with sharper eyes and colder smiles. But she knew this: whatever judgment came, it would meet her whole. And somewhere deep within the castle, beneath stone and history, the smallest truth continued to echo, that real nobility does not demand to be believed, it simply remains, quietly, until the world catches up. Morning unfolded with unusual urgency, the kind that tightened the air before anyone spoke a word. Servants moved faster through the corridors, their footsteps overlapping, their voices hushed but alert. Garments were aired, silver polished, banners inspected. The castle was preparing not just for guests, but for judgment. The traveler sensed it before she was told, feeling it in the way eyes lingered a second longer, in the careful politeness that replaced easy warmth. She stood near the window as sunlight struggled through thin clouds, her reflection faint beside the sky. Somewhere deep inside, an old instinct stirred, the instinct to leave before being pushed away. She breathed through it and stayed where she was. The queen summoned her before midday. The chamber was quiet when the traveler entered, sunlight resting gently on the stone floor. The queen studied her for a long moment, then spoke without ceremony. "At the gathering," she said, "there will be questions. Not all of them kind." The traveler inclined her head. "Questions do not frighten me," she said. "Only silence does." The queen's lips curved slightly. "Good. Because you must speak only when truth calls you, not when pride does." Preparations continued through the afternoon. The traveler was offered fine clothing, richer than anything she had worn in years. She touched the fabric with hesitation. "I do not wish to pretend," she said softly. "You will not," the queen replied. "Clothing does not create falsehood. Intention does." As servants adjusted the gown, the traveler caught her reflection again. She looked unfamiliar. Not because she seemed royal, but because she looked like someone allowed to be seen. The thought unsettled her more than doubt ever had. In the courtyard, the prince oversaw final arrangements. When he saw her approach, he fell silent. "You look ready," he said, though his voice carried concern. "I don't feel ready," she answered honestly. "But I feel steady." They walked together beneath the archways. "They will measure you," he said. "Lineage, Polish, certainty." She smiled faintly. "Then they will find me incomplete," she said. "As all humans are." He stopped walking. "If they turn against you, I will still be myself," she said gently, meeting his eyes. "That is the one thing no gathering can take." As evening neared, the first distant horn sounded, announcing approaching guests. Carriages rolled toward the gates, wheels echoing against stone. Laughter and confident voices drifted into the courtyard, sharp and bright. The traveler felt the weight of every step as she followed the queen and prince to receive them. Eyes assessed her instantly. Some curious, some dismissive, a few sharp with suspicion. She felt them like pinpricks but kept her gaze calm, her posture relaxed. She greeted when greeted, listened more than she spoke. At supper, conversation flowed quickly, cleverly. Titles were dropped like ornaments. Achievements polished until they gleamed. The traveler spoke little, but when she did, her words landed softly, thoughtfully, often leaving silence behind them, not awkward, but reflective. One guest leaned forward, smiling thinly. "You are very composed," he said. "One would expect nerves." She met his gaze evenly. "Composure," she replied, "is not the absence of feeling. It is respect for it." The table quieted. Somewhere nearby, a goblet was set down too quickly. As night deepened, the traveler felt the familiar pull of uncertainty return. But beneath it was something new, a quiet trust in herself. She did not need to impress. She only needed to remain. When the gathering finally settled into low conversation and candlelight, the queen watched her from across the room. There was no doubt now. Not because of peace or posture or grace under scrutiny, but because of something far rarer. The traveler did not harden under pressure. She did not shrink either. She stayed open. And in a world built to reward armor, that openness was the bravest proof of all. The night stretched long after the gathering had officially ended, though sleep avoided the castle like an unwelcome guest. Candles burned low in clusters, shadows clinging to the corners of rooms where whispered conversations continued. Outside, clouds moved slowly across the moon, dimming and revealing its light in quiet cycles. The traveler stood on a balcony alone, the cool air brushing her face, her breath visible in the chill. Below, the courtyard was nearly empty now, carriages long gone, their echoes fading into memory. What remained was the weight of what had been said and what had not. She rested her hands on the stone railing, grounding herself in its cool certainty. Doubt returned easily at night. Footsteps approached softly behind her. She did not turn at once. She already knew who it was. "You handled them well," the prince said, his voice low, careful not to break the stillness. She smiled faintly. "I didn't handle them," she replied. "I let them be." He joined her at the railing, looking out into the dark. "Some were impressed," he said. "Others unsettled." "That is often the same thing," she answered. They stood together in silence for a while. Then he spoke again. "You could have spoken more." You chose not to. She nodded. When people are eager to judge, words only give them more to misinterpret. He glanced at her. And when they are eager to listen, then even silence speaks, she said. The next morning arrived slowly, the castle waking as if tired from the effort of judgment. Servants moved with subdued efficiency. Laughter from the night before had faded, replaced by quiet reflection. In the council chamber, nobles gathered again, this time without ceremony. The traveler was not present, but her name hovered between them. She unsettles tradition, one said. Or reminds us why it existed, another countered. The queen listened without interruption, her face unreadable. Meanwhile, the traveler spent the morning in the gardens, helping trim damaged branches left from the storm days earlier. The work was simple, grounding. She welcomed it. When a servant approached and said, "Her Majesty wishes to see you," she wiped her hands clean and followed calmly. The chamber felt heavier than before. The queen stood by the window, back turned. "Some say you are too quiet," she said. "Others say you are dangerous because of it." The traveler considered this. "Quiet allows space," she replied. "Not everyone is comfortable with space." The queen turned, studying her carefully. "If you remain here," she said, "your life will not be simple. You will be watched, weighed, challenged." The traveler wrapped her hands around the cup, welcoming the warmth. "Understanding takes time," she replied. "Sometimes longer than a lifetime." The queen watched the steam rise between them. "Tell me," she said, "who were you before the road took everything familiar?" The traveler hesitated. This question felt different, less like a test, more like an invitation. "I was a daughter taught to notice," she said quietly. "To listen before speaking. To feel the world, even when it hurt. And when that world fell apart." The queen asked. "I kept listening," she answered. "It was the only thing I knew how to do." The queen leaned back, thoughtful. "Most who come here try to become something new," she said. "You remained." Later that day, the traveler joined the prince on a walk beyond the inner gardens, to a place where the walls grew lower and the land opened wide. They spoke of small things, at first the shape of clouds, the stubbornness of old trees, but gradually, their words grew more personal. "Do you ever wish to disappear?" the prince asked quietly. She nodded. "Often," she said. "But I've learned that disappearing doesn't erase pain. It only delays understanding it." He smiled, not with amusement, but recognition. As evening approached, the mist lifted, revealing a sky washed clean and bright. In the great hall, music played softly for the first time since the gathering. The traveler watched others dance, laugh, move without watching themselves. She felt no rush to join. Contentment came to her gently, like a hand resting on her shoulder. A servant approached, hesitant. "Your presence has changed things," he said. "People speak more kindly when you are near." She shook her head lightly. "They always had the choice," she replied. That night, lying in her chamber, she thought of the pea not as a test, but as a reminder of how the smallest truths, once felt, could never be unfelt. Sleep came easily. Outside, the mist finally vanished completely, leaving the castle clear against the stars. Inside, something equally rare had happened. A life once defined by proving had shifted into a life allowed simply to be. And in that quiet permission, the deepest transformation had already begun. The 11th day dawned with a gentle rain, softer than the storm that had first brought the traveler to the castle. It fell like a delicate sigh, tapping against the tall windows and washing the garden paths in a quiet rhythm. The castle felt alive in a different way today, not with the tension of judgment, but with the subtle hum of expectation, of lives adjusting to a presence they had once questioned. The traveler stood in her chamber, listening to the rain. She had grown accustomed to the sound, finding it almost comforting now. Each drop against the glass was like a heartbeat, reminding her that the world outside continued, that she continued. She dressed simply, smoothing her gown, and moved with a quiet confidence that had been absent in her first days. When she entered the great hall for breakfast, the queen and the prince were already present. The prince's gaze met hers, and for the first time, there was no need for words. They shared understanding. The queen, as always, observed carefully, her expression unreadable yet softer than before. Today, the queen began, we will visit the eastern woods. It is time to see how you navigate without the walls to shelter you. The traveler nodded. I am ready, she said. The path through the woods was wet from the rain, leaves slick and dark, roots hidden beneath. The traveler moved deliberately, her step steady, her eyes observing. She paused to watch a small bird shake raindrops from its feathers, then knelt to steady a loose branch that blocked the trail for the prince. Your awareness is extraordinary, the prince said softly. Even here, where nothing seems urgent, you notice what matters. She smiled faintly. Urgency is everywhere, she replied. Even in small things. As they walked deeper into the woods, they came upon a young boy trying to free a trapped fawn from a tangle of brambles. His tiny hands were scratched, his face streaked with tears. Without hesitation, the traveler knelt beside him. We will free it together, she said, guiding his hands gently. The fawn leapt free, bounding into the shadows. The boy's eyes widened with gratitude. Thank you, he whispered, barely able to speak. Kindness is not a favor, she replied. It is a choice. The prince watched silently, impressed by her calm authority, by the way she moved in the world without demanding attention. When they returned to the castle, the halls were quieter than usual. Servants and nobles alike had noticed the traveler's actions, spreading word not through gossip, but through awe. Later, she spent time in the library, reading old texts with a quiet focus. The queen entered, sitting opposite her. You are learning quickly, she said. Not only the words, but the meaning behind them. The traveler looked up, serene. I listen, she said simply. Evening fell slowly, painting the walls in shades of amber and rose. The rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean. She stood by the window once more, gazing out at the castle grounds. The prince joined her quietly, without announcement. You have changed more than the castle, he said softly. And you, she replied, are learning what to notice. As night deepened, the traveler retired to her chamber, feeling a calm she had not known in years. The rain outside was replaced by a gentle wind, rustling leaves in a lullaby. She thought of all she had faced: the storm, the bed, the judgment, the scrutiny, and realized that she had arrived not by luck, but by staying true to herself. And somewhere deep within the castle, a lesson took root, a reminder that patience, attentiveness, and quiet courage often reveal what pride and display never can. The 12th day began with a crisp, golden light spilling through the castle windows, illuminating dust motes that danced lazily in the air. The castle seemed to breathe differently today, softer and more open, as if the traveler's presence had shifted not only the people within its walls but the very stones themselves. She rose before sunrise, her movements deliberate and calm, carrying the quiet strength that had begun to define her. After a simple breakfast, the queen approached her with a thoughtful expression. "Today," she said, "you will accompany the prince to the northern meadows. It is not a test, but an observation of character." The traveler inclined her head. "I understand," she replied, aware that observation and judgment often walked hand in hand. The ride to the meadows was filled with silence, the kind of comfortable silence that spoke more than words could. The mist hovered over the fields, catching the first rays of the sun, giving the landscape a magical, almost unreal quality. Horses trotted steadily along the path, their hooves pressing into the softened earth. Upon arrival, they found a small group of villagers struggling to repair a broken fence that had been torn down by the recent rains. Tools were scattered, and frustration was clear in the faces of the farmers. The traveler dismounted immediately, her cloak brushing the wet grass. "Let us work together," she said softly, smiling at them. "There is no need to do this alone." The villagers looked at her skeptically at first, and used to being met with genuine kindness rather than condescension. But she began helping without hesitation, lifting heavy posts, holding beams steady, offering words of guidance and encouragement. The prince followed her example, though it was clear he was learning more from watching than doing. Hours passed under the sun, their muscles straining, their clothes damp with sweat. Yet laughter began to replace the frustration, small smiles brightening tired faces. The traveler noticed each subtle shift, speaking to each person with warmth and respect, never patronizing, never assuming. When the work was done, the villagers gathered around, expressing gratitude in simple, heartfelt ways. One elder placed a hand on the traveler's shoulder. "You have made a difference today," he said quietly. "Not with words, but with deeds." She nodded, feeling the truth of his words more deeply than any compliment could convey. "Every choice matters," she said simply. "Even small ones." The journey back to the castle was quiet. The traveler rode with her thoughts, reflecting on the lessons of the day. She had come to understand that true influence is rarely loud or immediate, it is the subtle, patient guidance that changes hearts without fanfare. That evening, she found herself in the library again, poring over an old journal of the Queen's own mother. The words spoke of duty, resilience, and the delicate balance between authority and empathy. She realized that her own journey was not only about proving herself to others, but also about understanding the depth of compassion required to lead wisely. As night fell, the wind rustled gently through the trees, and the stars began to appear one by one. The traveler stood at her window, gazing at the vastness of the sky, feeling both small and immense at once. She had endured storms, judgment, and scrutiny, yet she remained steadfast. The rain, the quiet tests of character, they had all brought her here, not to claim power, but to witness it in its truest form. And in the heart of the castle, a quiet certainty grew that genuine nobility is revealed not in grandeur or proclamation, but in patience, humility, and the courage to remain true when no one is watching. The 13th day dawned with a pale, fragile light that seeped through the castle windows, spilling across the stone floors in long, soft streaks. The air smelled faintly of wet earth and dew, carrying the memory of storms past. The traveler rose with the first rays of sunlight, stretching slowly, her body and mind accustomed now to the rhythm of the castle yet still alive to its subtle tensions. After a quiet breakfast, the queen called her to the private sitting room once more. The fire burned low, casting flickering shadows on the walls lined with tapestries depicting generations of kings and queens. The queen's gaze was steady as she gestured for the traveler to sit. "There is a festival in the village today," the queen began. "Music, dancing, food, the celebration of life and labor. You will accompany us not as a guest of rank, but as one among them." The traveler inclined her head. "I am ready," she said, feeling the weight of experience tempered by patience and grace. The journey to the village was bright and lively, the path flanked by fields glistening with morning dew. Children ran ahead, laughing, their feet splashing in puddles left by the morning mist. Women carried baskets of bread and fruit, and men tended small animals, pausing to nod at the travelers as they passed. At the festival, the atmosphere was one of genuine joy, though not without work. The villagers were busy preparing for performances, food, and games. The traveler moved among them with quiet attentiveness, offering hands where help was needed, smiles where encouragement was required, and listening ears when stories poured forth. A group of children struggled with a small puppet show, tangled in strings and ropes. The traveler knelt beside them, guiding their hands, untangling the knots. "Patience," she said gently. "The story will tell itself if you allow it." The prince observed from a distance, noting how easily she commanded respect without demanding it. Her presence encouraged cooperation, not fear, trust, not obligation. Later, a small disagreement arose between two vendors over space for their goods. Voices rose, frustration flaring. The traveler approached, speaking calmly. "There is enough room for both," she said, guiding them to find a solution. Her tone was neither commanding nor pleading, it was simply certain. By the time she stepped away, the vendors were laughing, shaking their heads at their own stubbornness. As the sun lowered toward the horizon, casting long golden shadows over the festival, the traveler joined the villagers in their dancing, not with formal steps, but with joy. The children laughed, the adults smiled, and even the prince could not help but be drawn into the warmth of the moment. By the time the group returned to the castle, the traveler's clothes were streaked with dirt and sweat, but her eyes shone with contentment. The queen noted it silently, recognizing once more the quiet power of authenticity. That evening, as the castle settled under a deepening sky, the traveler sat by the fire, reflecting on the day. The festival had reminded her that influence is not claimed by decree or title, it is earned by action, by care, by remaining steady and true in the midst of life's chaos. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying faint echoes of laughter from the village below. And inside, the castle walls seemed to lean a little closer, as if acknowledging that genuine nobility is revealed not in grand gestures, but in the subtle, persistent acts of kindness and courage that define a life worth remembering. The 14th day dawned with an unusual calm, the castle bathed in soft morning light that streamed through arched windows, painting golden streaks across the stone floors. The air smelled faintly of rain yet to come, mixed with the lingering scent of fresh bread from the kitchens. The traveler awoke before the bells, stretching slowly, savoring the quiet moments before the bustle of the day began. After breakfast, the queen approached her with an unreadable expression. "Today," she said, "you will accompany the prince on a hunt through the northern forest. Not for sport alone, but to observe patience, judgment, and care in action." The traveler nodded, adjusting her cloak. "I understand," she replied, feeling a familiar mixture of anticipation and serenity. The path into the forest was damp and uneven, the recent rains leaving puddles and mud that threatened missteps. The traveler moved carefully, her eyes scanning the ground, the trees, and the wildlife, attuned to every sound and movement. Birds stirred in the branches, squirrels darted across fallen logs, and the scent of earth and moss was thick and intoxicating. The prince rode beside her, bow in hand, but mostly silent. He observed how she noticed details he often overlooked: the slight shift of a deer in the brush, the sound of water running over stones, the careful balance required to step on slippery roots. Hours passed with few words spoken. Then, they came across a wounded stag, its leg caught in a trap left by careless hunters. Panic fluttered in the animal's eyes, but the traveler approached slowly, kneeling on the ground. She spoke softly, her hands moving carefully to untangle the trap. "We must not harm it further," she murmured. The prince watched in silence, noting the way she balanced caution with courage, empathy with practicality. When the stag was finally freed, it stood unsteadily, then bolted into the forest, leaving them both breathless. "You could have shot it," the prince said after a long pause. "The hunters would have praised you for skill." She shook her head gently. "Skill without care is nothing," she replied. "True strength lies in knowing when to act and when to preserve life." As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows through the forest, they returned to the castle. The traveler's boots were muddy, her cloak streaked, but her eyes shone with quiet satisfaction. Later, she walked through the castle gardens, reflecting on the day. Patience, she realized, was not passive. It was active, attentive, and often demanding. Strength was not merely force, it was restraint, discernment, and empathy. The queen observed from a balcony above, noting the subtle shifts in those around her. The prince had grown quieter, more thoughtful, more aware of the weight of choices. The traveler had not changed for them, she had only remained true to herself. Yet that truth was shaping the world in ways small and profound. That night, as the castle settled under a sky filled with stars, the traveler lay in her chamber, listening to the soft rustle of leaves outside. She thought of the stag, the villagers, the children, and the small acts that mattered more than titles or crowns. And deep within the walls of the castle, a quiet truth took root, one that could not be tested by comfort or ceremony, only by the consistency of heart and courage in the ordinary moments that define a life of real nobility. The 15th day began with a gentle drizzle, the kind of rain that clung to leaves and cobblestones, leaving the castle wrapped in a quiet, reflective mood. The air smelled of wet earth and stone, and the soft rhythm of droplets on the windows created a lullaby that made the traveler feel both awake and calm. She rose early, stretching her arms, letting the cool morning touch her skin, and walked to the window to watch the rain streak across the garden paths. After a simple breakfast, the queen summoned her to the hall. "Today, you will join the villagers in the market," she said, her voice steady. "Observe, assist, learn, not as a noble, but as one of them." The traveler inclined her head. "I will do my best," she replied, understanding that the lessons of empathy and observation were ongoing, not completed with a single act. The market was alive with activity. Stalls were filled with vibrant fruits, fresh bread, hand-woven cloth, and small trinkets. The villagers moved with purpose, but their faces carried the strain of daily labor. Children darted through the crowd, laughing, squealing, and dodging between the adults. The traveler stepped forward calmly, offering to help an elderly vendor arrange her wares, her hands careful not to crush the fragile goods. "It seems the rain has slowed your morning," she said softly. The woman looked at her, surprise flickering across her face. "You notice?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I notice many things," the traveler replied gently. "Not to judge, but to understand." Throughout the morning, she moved from stall to stall, assisting where she could, offering encouragement when needed, listening deeply when villagers shared worries or small joys. She never corrected harshly, never commanded, never sought praise. Her presence alone created a ripple of calm, subtly changing the rhythm of the market. By midday, a dispute arose between two vendors over the placement of a stall. Voices were raised, tension mounting. The traveler approached, standing between them without taking sides. "There is room enough for both of you," she said calmly. "Let us find a way that allows everyone to flourish." Through patient negotiation and gentle guidance, she helped the vendors find an arrangement that pleased them both. When the quarrel ended, laughter replaced the tension, and both women shook her hands in gratitude. The prince observed from a distance, noting the way her humility and quiet authority worked together. She did not seek acknowledgement, yet every action inspired respect and cooperation. As the afternoon faded, the rain stopped, leaving puddles that reflected the soft sky. Children played among them, and the traveler laughed lightly with them, her joy unforced, her movements graceful yet unpretentious. When they returned to the castle, she was damp and tired, but her expression held serenity. She passed through corridors where whispers of her deeds had already spread. Servants and nobles alike had begun to speak differently, more kindly, more thoughtfully because of her presence. That evening, alone in her chamber, the traveler reflected on the day. She realized that true influence is quiet, often invisible at first, yet enduring. It is not granted by title, reward, or recognition, but by consistent acts of care, attentiveness, and courage in the small, ordinary moments. Outside, the rain began again, soft and insistent, tapping gently against the windows. Inside, the castle walls seemed to hum with a new understanding that nobility is revealed not by grandeur or ceremony, but by the heart that chooses compassion and courage over convenience, every day, without fail. The 16th day began under a gray sky, heavy with clouds that promised rain yet again. The castle felt different in this light, not somber, but reflective, as if it were holding its breath, waiting. The traveler woke before sunrise, her body and mind attuned to the quiet rhythm of the morning. She dressed carefully, smoothing her gown, and moved to the window to watch the courtyard glisten with dew and the first few drops of rain that had already begun to fall. After breakfast, the queen approached her in the hall, the expression on her face calm but deliberate. "Today," she said, "you will accompany me on a visit to the infirmary. There are those among our people who need care, not for appearances, but for comfort." The traveler inclined her head, feeling the weight of anticipation without fear. "I will follow," she said, her voice quiet but resolute. The infirmary was a small building near the castle walls, simple and utilitarian. Inside, beds lined the walls, each occupied by someone recovering from illness or injury. The air smelled faintly of herbs and warm water, the atmosphere heavy with unspoken suffering. The traveler moved from bed to bed, listening more than speaking, noticing small details that others overlooked. A child shivered despite the blanket, and she adjusted it carefully, murmuring gentle words. An elderly man winced when he shifted, and she guided him into a more comfortable position. Her hands were steady, her touch sure yet soft. The queen followed silently, observing how the traveler commanded neither attention nor deference, yet inspired both naturally. Nurses and aides began to mirror her calm, attentive ways, adjusting their approach to the patients with subtle grace. At one bed, a young woman cried quietly, overwhelmed by fear and fatigue. The traveler sat beside her, offering no words at first, only presence. Gradually, she spoke softly. "You are not alone," she said. "Even when it feels unbearable, someone notices, someone cares." Tears slipped down the young woman's cheeks, but she smiled faintly, the weight of her fear easing. The traveler did not move away until she knew her comfort was steady. Hours passed with small acts of care, yet none were performed for show. Every movement, every gesture, was deliberate, rooted in attention and empathy. The prince, who had joined later, witnessed silently how influence could be exerted not with force, but with patience and genuine concern. When they returned to the castle, the traveler was quiet, her mind replaying moments from the infirmary. She realized that courage and nobility are not always found in great deeds or heroic feats. They lie in the willingness to notice suffering, to respond without expectation, and to offer steadiness where chaos might otherwise reign. That evening, as the rain fell in soft, steady sheets, the traveler sat by her window, the sound of droplets like a lullaby. She felt the deep satisfaction that comes from understanding the true measure of character, not in accolades, not in ceremony, but in consistent, compassionate presence. And within the castle walls, a silent lesson was unfolding. Nobility is less about what is claimed and more about what is quietly lived, in every unobserved moment, with humility, courage, and heart. The 17th day dawned with a fragile sunlight filtering through the morning mist, casting the castle grounds in a soft, golden haze. The traveler awoke to the distant calls of birds, their songs mingling with the faint scent of damp earth and blooming flowers. She stretched slowly, savoring the serenity that had begun to settle over her mornings, and dressed with careful precision, her movements calm, deliberate. After breakfast, the queen approached her, holding a folded parchment. "Today," she said. "We will visit the northern bridge and the surrounding villages. There has been damage from the storms, and many will need guidance, not orders." The traveler accepted the parchment with a nod. "I am ready," she said. The journey to the bridge was quiet, the only sounds the hooves of horses on the wet path and the distant chatter of villagers preparing for the day. The bridge itself had suffered partially from the recent rains. One side was weakened, stones shifted, and the stream below churned with muddy water. The traveler dismounted, moving carefully across the bridge to inspect the damage. She guided villagers who had gathered, offering calm, practical advice. "Lift the beams gently," she instructed, "and support each other. The structure is fragile, but we are steady together." The prince followed behind, watching as the traveler's presence inspired cooperation without command. Even the most stubborn villagers adjusted their movements, responding to her guidance rather than orders. Later, a group of children approached the edge of the bridge, curious and playful despite the danger. The traveler knelt beside them, explaining how to step safely and offering her hand to steady those who wobbled. "Caution does not mean fear," she said softly. "It means care for yourself and others." The villagers began to work together in a rhythm, moving stones, reinforcing beams, and cleaning debris. The traveler moved among them, never dominating, never taking credit, yet her influence was undeniable. She noticed a weak spot no one else saw and directed a young man to strengthen it, all while speaking with gentle encouragement. As the sun climbed higher, the sky brightened, and the repaired bridge began to take shape. The travelers and villagers alike paused to admire the work, smiles spreading, tension easing. The prince finally spoke, his voice filled with quiet admiration. "You lead without demanding," he said. "Without title or authority, yet everyone listens." The traveler smiled faintly. "Leadership is not about making people follow," she replied. "It is about creating space for them to act with purpose." The return journey to the castle was filled with soft conversation, the villagers' laughter echoing in the distance. Within the castle walls, servants and nobles alike had begun to change the way they interacted, not out of fear, but from the subtle example she set. That evening, the traveler rested by the fire in her chamber, reflecting on the day. She realized anew that courage and wisdom are revealed not in grand displays, but in the quiet moments when attention, care, and patience intersect with action. Outside, rain began to fall once more, light and steady, tapping against the windows. And inside, a quiet truth had settled into the castle's foundation. Nobility is measured not by rank or decree, but by the consistent, compassionate choices that define a person's heart and character. The 18th day began with a soft, golden light spilling across the castle courtyard, filtering through clouds that had parted after a night of gentle rain. The air smelled of wet stone and blooming flowers, and the subtle freshness brought a calm sense of renewal. The traveler awoke with a quiet determination, stretching her limbs and savoring the stillness before the day's work began. After a modest breakfast, the queen approached her with a slight smile. "Today, you will accompany the prince to the western fields. There is work to be done, but also lessons to be learned about patience and observation." The traveler nodded. "I am ready," she said, her voice steady. The western fields were vast, stretching far beyond the castle walls, dotted with farmers tending to crops that had been battered by recent storms. Paths were muddy, and puddles reflected the shifting clouds above. The traveler dismounted and began walking among the farmers, observing their labor with careful attention. She noticed a young farmer struggling to lift a heavy sack of grain. Without hesitation, she approached and offered assistance, guiding him to steady the load. "Strength is best used with care," she said gently. "It does not mean forcing the world to bend to your will." The prince watched from nearby, noting how her influence spread quietly. She did not command, nor did she demand recognition. Yet every action she took inspired trust and cooperation. As they moved through the fields, the traveler noticed other challenges: a collapsed fence, an animal trapped in a low-lying stream, crops tangled by wind and rain. She addressed each situation calmly, offering guidance, steady hands, and reassurance. Villagers began to mirror her patience, working together rather than against one another. A small child approached, frightened by the sight of a calf stuck in mud. The traveler knelt, speaking softly, guiding the child's hands to help free the animal. "Courage," she said, "is not the absence of fear, but moving forward despite it." Hours passed under the pale sun, each moment teaching the travelers more about subtle leadership, empathy, and the quiet strength that arises from attentiveness. By late afternoon, the fields were orderly, the animals safe, and the villagers' spirits lifted. On the return to the castle, the traveler walked beside the prince in silence. He finally spoke, his voice thoughtful. "Your presence changes how people move, how they think, how they feel. It is not force, yet it is undeniable." She smiled faintly. "True influence," she replied, "is not claimed. It is offered through example." That evening, the traveler returned to her chamber, weary but fulfilled. She watched raindrops trace paths down the window pane, listening to the soft murmur of wind through the trees. She reflected on the day's work, the quiet cooperation, the patience, the courage shown in small, everyday acts. And somewhere deep within the castle, a subtle truth continued to grow, that nobility is revealed not through proclamations or tests, but through consistent, compassionate choices, through attentiveness to others, and through the courage to act rightly when no one demands it. The 19th day broke under a pale, silver light as the sun struggled to pierce a veil of clouds lingering low over the castle. The air smelled of damp earth and fresh leaves, a soft, lingering reminder of the recent rains. The traveler awoke quietly, her mind already tracing the events of the past days, reflecting on what patience, courage, and kindness had revealed. She dressed with deliberate care, feeling the weight and calm of her own presence settle around her like a cloak. After breakfast, the queen approached with a steady gaze. "Today," she said, "we will visit the hilltop orchard. There are tasks to complete, but also lessons in observation and careful action." The traveler nodded. "I understand," she replied. The journey to the orchard was slow, winding along narrow paths slit with dew and rain. Trees heavy with fruit leaned under the weight of ripening harvests. The traveler's eyes moved constantly, noticing branches that threatened to break, fruits that had fallen and begun to rot, and small gaps in the fencing that allowed animals to wander too close. Upon arrival, the travelers dismounted and began work. The traveler guided the villagers gently, suggesting methods for gathering fruit without bruising it, reinforcing fences to prevent future intrusion, and clearing fallen branches to maintain safe paths. Her hands were steady, her voice calm, encouraging. A small boy approached nervously, holding a basket far too heavy for him. The traveler knelt beside him. "It is okay to ask for help," she said. "Strength is not always measured in what we can carry alone, but in how we care for each other." He smiled faintly and placed the basket in her hands. "Thank you," he whispered. The prince observed from a distance, noting the way she moved naturally among the workers, gaining trust not by rank or command, but through patience, careful attention, and the quiet assurance of her presence. Each gesture inspired confidence and cooperation, creating a rhythm in the orchard that carried through the hours. As the day progressed, the traveler noticed a section of trees weakened by disease. She called the villagers together, explaining how to prune carefully to save the healthy branches and prevent further spread. Her instructions were neither harsh nor patronizing, they were precise, delivered with empathy and understanding. By late afternoon, the orchard was organized and tended, the trees healthier, and the villagers' spirits lifted. The travelers and villagers shared small smiles, quiet laughter, and a sense of accomplishment that needed no words to recognize. On the journey back to the castle, the traveler walked beside the prince. "You teach without speaking," he said softly. "Without demanding obedience, yet everyone listens." She met his gaze, her smile gentle. "Action and presence speak louder than words," she said. "What is done quietly resonates more than what is said loudly." That evening, she returned to her chamber, her body tired but her spirit fulfilled. She sat by the window, listening to the soft patter of rain returning to the world, reflecting on the lessons of the day. True strength, she realized, was measured not in dominance, but in care, not in recognition, but in steady, compassionate attention to what mattered. And within the castle, a quiet transformation continued, one that could not be forced, one that grew naturally from the courage, patience, and humility demonstrated in the simplest, most persistent acts of daily life. The 20th day began with a soft, gray dawn, the sky heavy with clouds that promised rain again, their weight mirrored in the quiet stillness of the castle. The traveler awoke before the bells, stretching slowly, feeling the calm of a body accustomed to movement and purpose. She dressed deliberately, smoothing the folds of her gown, and moved to the window to watch droplets form on the stone ledges and trickle down, reflecting the dim morning light. After a modest breakfast, the queen approached her, her expression calm but resolute. "Today, you will accompany the prince to the eastern hills," she said. "There are tasks to accomplish, but more importantly, you will observe the ways people respond to challenge and guidance." The traveler nodded. "I will follow," she said, her voice steady and quiet, carrying the confidence of experience. The journey to the hills was slow and deliberate. The paths were muddy from previous rains, lined with tall grasses that swayed in the wind, and dotted with wildflowers bending under droplets. The traveler noticed the uneven ground, warning the prince of slippery stones, while her eyes scanned for signs of wildlife or hidden hazards. Upon arrival, they found several villagers attempting to repair small cottages damaged by recent storms. Their frustration was palpable. Boards had been torn, roofs leaked, and tools were scattered. The traveler stepped forward, kneeling to examine the weak spots, and offered guidance with gentle words. "Work together," she said. "Support each other, and the burden becomes lighter for all." Her presence shifted the group immediately. Where there had been confusion and irritation, cooperation began to emerge. She moved from task to task, lifting beams, steadying ladders, and explaining careful techniques. She did not command, she observed, guided, and encouraged. A young girl struggled to carry a bucket of water to mix plaster. The traveler approached and said softly, "You are strong, but even the strongest need support." She helped guide the girl's hands and balanced the load until it was safely delivered. The child's eyes brightened, and a shy smile spread across her face. The prince watched silently, learning from her example. Her influence was subtle, almost invisible, yet undeniable. People responded not because they were told to, but because she had shown attention, patience, and genuine care. Hours passed, and the cottages were stabilized, the repairs begun in earnest. The villagers' laughter and quiet conversations replaced earlier tension, a testament to the traveler's gentle leadership. When the work was complete, she stepped back, allowing the villagers to see the results of their combined effort. On the ride back to the castle, the traveler and prince walked side by side through the soft drizzle. "Your guidance does not seek reward," the prince said thoughtfully. "Yet it changes everything." The traveler smiled faintly. "True influence," she said, "comes from doing what is right, not what is praised." That evening, she sat alone in her chamber, the soft rhythm of rain against the window lulling her into reflection. She thought of the villagers, the children, the repairs, and the quiet ways in which courage, patience, and empathy had reshaped the day. And within the castle walls, a truth took hold, one that needed no proclamation, no ceremony, and no crown to validate it. Nobility is revealed not in titles or tests, but in the consistent, compassionate choices made in ordinary, unobserved moments of life. The 21st day began with a gentle, diffused light filtering through a sky still heavy with clouds, remnants of the recent rains that had softened the land around the castle. The air smelled faintly of wet stone and flowering gardens, carrying a quiet freshness that seemed to settle over everything. The traveler awoke early, stretching slowly, savoring the calm that had become familiar yet never taken for granted. After breakfast, the queen approached her with a measured expression. "Today," she said, "you will accompany the prince to the southern meadows. There is work to be done, but the true lesson is in observing the hearts of those around you." The traveler inclined her head. "I understand," she replied, her voice steady, carrying the quiet confidence that had grown from days of careful observation and gentle guidance. The journey to the southern meadows was peaceful, though the paths were still slick with lingering moisture. The traveler's eyes moved constantly, noticing subtle shifts in the landscape, the slight dip where water collected, a branch bent under its own weight, a bird's nest precariously perched. She moved deliberately, aware that attention was as important as action. Upon arrival, they found villagers preparing for a seasonal harvest, struggling to coordinate their efforts. Some were exhausted, others impatient, and the tasks seemed overwhelming. The traveler knelt beside a group attempting to lift a heavy cart, offering hands and careful guidance. "Steady," she said gently. "One step at a time, together, and the burden becomes lighter. Her presence shifted the dynamic immediately. Cooperation replaced confusion, and a rhythm developed among the workers. The prince watched quietly, noting how influence need not be enforced, it could be demonstrated, shared, and trusted. A small boy was trying to herd a stubborn goat that refused to move. The traveler approached, crouching to meet his eyes. "Patience," she said softly. "The world will not always bend to force, but kindness can guide it." Together, they coaxed the goat along, and the boy's laughter rang out clear and bright. The afternoon passed in a steady, purposeful flow. The traveler guided repairs to fences, helped gather produce, and encouraged teamwork. Her influence was never loud, never commanding, yet every action inspired trust and cooperation. Even those initially resistant found themselves following her example, motivated by her calm attention and unwavering presence. When the work was complete, the villagers stepped back to admire their efforts. Smiles and quiet laughter filled the meadow. The traveler, without seeking recognition, allowed them to bask in their own accomplishment. On the ride back to the castle, the prince spoke quietly. "You have a way of teaching without speaking," he said. "You show what is possible, and people respond naturally." She looked at him, her gaze serene. "Leadership is not measured by authority," she said. "It is measured by the courage, patience, and care you bring to each moment, especially when no one is watching." That evening, in her chamber, the traveler reflected on the day. The sun dipped behind the clouds, casting long shadows across the castle walls, while a soft wind carried the distant laughter of the villagers. She realized that true nobility was revealed not in grand gestures or accolades, but in the quiet, consistent acts of empathy, attentiveness, and courage that shaped the world around us. And within the castle, a subtle transformation continued to unfold, one that would not be written in stone or celebrated in song, but felt deeply in the hearts of all who had witnessed the power of steady, compassionate presence. The 22nd day began under a pale, misty sky, the kind that blurred the edges of the castle walls and softened the gardens into shapes of silver and green. The traveler woke early, the sound of distant rain still lingering in the air, a gentle reminder of the storms that had passed and the quiet growth that followed. She dressed deliberately, her hands smoothing the folds of her gown, and stepped to the window to watch the morning slowly awaken. After breakfast, the queen approached with a measured, thoughtful expression. "Today," she said, "you will accompany the prince to the eastern woods. There is work to be done, but more importantly, you must observe how care, patience, and discernment shape the world around us." The traveler inclined her head. "I understand," she said, her voice calm but determined. The path into the woods was slick with rain, roots exposed and leaves slick underfoot. The traveler moved carefully, noticing the slightest shift in the terrain, the movement of small animals, the soft rustle of branches that had been weakened by wind and water. She paused to adjust a broken branch that threatened the safety of a path, motioning to the prince to follow her example. They came upon a group of villagers trying to repair a fallen footbridge over a narrow stream. The travelers observed as frustration flared. Boards were heavy, tools clattered, and coordination was lacking. The traveler approached with calm authority, kneeling beside the planks. "Work together," she said gently. "Notice the weak spots, support each other, and proceed steadily. Haste will break more than it builds. The villagers responded immediately, their movements becoming synchronized. The prince watched quietly, noting how her presence inspired cooperation without fear or command. A small girl held a bundle of twigs, struggling to cross a slippery log. The traveler knelt beside her, guiding her steps with soft encouragement. "Courage," she said, "is moving forward despite fear. And patience helps us walk safely, even when the path is uncertain." Hours passed as they worked together to restore the bridge. Every plank secured, every rope tightened, became a lesson in attentiveness, teamwork, and careful guidance. The travelers and villagers began to move in a rhythm, small smiles and laughter replacing earlier tension. When the bridge was finally stable, the villagers stepped back to admire their combined efforts. Gratitude was expressed quietly, not through grand gestures, but in the shared understanding that their work had mattered. On the ride back to the castle, the prince spoke softly. "You lead without forcing anyone's hand," he said. "You guide, and people follow willingly." She smiled faintly. "True influence," she replied, "is never claimed. It is quietly demonstrated, patiently, consistently, and with care for all involved." That evening, in her chamber, the traveler reflected on the day. The woods had taught her once more that nobility and strength are revealed not in dominance or recognition, but in steady, compassionate actions, in attentiveness to the smallest details, and in the courage to act rightly when no one demands it. Outside, the rain began to fall again, light and steady, tapping a gentle rhythm on the windows. Inside, the castle seemed to breathe in unison with the traveler, the lessons of patience, empathy, and quiet courage echoing through the stone halls, shaping hearts and minds in subtle but lasting ways. The 23rd day began with a pale dawn breaking through lingering clouds, casting a soft, silver light over the castle and its gardens. The air was cool and carried the faint scent of wet earth and blooming flowers, a gentle reminder that growth often follows storms. The traveler awoke quietly, stretching slowly, letting the calm of the morning settle over her before she dressed and prepared for the day. After breakfast, the queen approached, her expression composed yet firm. "Today," she said, "you will accompany the prince to the southern orchards. There is work to be done, but the true lesson is in observing how care and patience ripple outward, affecting everyone around you." The traveler nodded. "I understand," she replied, her voice steady, carrying the quiet confidence that had grown over the weeks. The orchard stretched wide under a gray sky, their trees heavy with ripening fruit. Paths were muddy, leaves slick with rain, and small streams trickled through the fields. The traveler moved carefully among the trees, noticing fallen branches, bruised fruit, and spots where the soil had been weakened. She paused to guide a farmer in reinforcing a row of young saplings. "Strength," she said softly, "is not only in action, but in protecting what is fragile. Notice the smallest things, they often matter most." The prince watched from a distance, silently absorbing her methods. Her influence was subtle, yet undeniable. She did not command, she guided. She did not seek recognition, she inspired it. A group of children approached, eager to help with the harvest but unsure how. The traveler knelt to meet their eyes. "Work together," she said gently. "Even small hands can achieve great things when they move as one." She showed them how to gather fruit carefully, how to place it in baskets without bruising it. Their laughter soon echoed through the orchard, blending with the quiet rustle of leaves and the soft murmur of wind. Hours passed as she moved from task to task, mending fences, guiding workers, lifting fallen branches, and offering encouragement where it was needed. Each act was small, almost imperceptible, yet together they created a rhythm of cooperation, trust, and quiet joy. As the afternoon sun broke briefly through the clouds, the villagers paused to admire the orchard. Trees were upright, branches supported, fruit gathered with care, and the workers themselves carried a new lightness in their steps. The travelers stepped back, allowing them to see the results of their combined effort, her satisfaction quiet but deep. On the journey back to the castle, the prince spoke softly, almost to himself. You show the way without demanding it. People follow because they want to, not because they must. The traveler smiled faintly. Leadership is not about control, she replied. It is about creating space for others to act with courage, patience, and care. That evening, she sat by her window in the quiet of her chamber, listening to the soft rhythm of distant rain. She reflected on the day, the small hands, the patient guidance, the gentle encouragement, and the way steady, compassionate action had transformed not just the orchard, but the hearts of those who worked within it. And deep within the castle walls, a truth continued to take root: nobility is not measured by title or acclaim, but by the quiet, consistent choices that reveal courage, empathy, and steadfastness in every moment, no matter how small or unseen. The 24th day dawned with a soft, silvery light spilling over the castle, filtering through the lingering morning mist and painting the stone walls with a quiet glow. The air carried the faint scent of wet grass and blooming flowers, a gentle reminder of rainstorms past and renewal yet to come. The traveler awoke before the castle bells, stretching slowly, savoring the calm of the morning and the rhythm that had begun to shape her days. After a simple breakfast, the queen approached her with a thoughtful expression. Today, she said, you will accompany the prince to the western hills. There is work to be done, yes, but the true lesson lies in patience, observation, and understanding the subtle needs of those around you. The traveler inclined her head. I understand, she said, her voice quiet but steady, carrying the confidence that had been cultivated through weeks of careful attention and gentle guidance. The journey to the hills was serene yet challenging. Paths were muddy, the wind carried a chill, and the grasses swayed under the weight of raindrops. The traveler moved deliberately, her eyes scanning the terrain for hazards, broken branches, and the smallest signs of struggle among the villagers they passed. Upon arrival, they found a group of villagers attempting to repair a collapsed fence that had been damaged during the recent storms. Frustration was evident. Boards were heavy, tools scattered, and coordination lacking. The traveler approached calmly, kneeling to examine the structure. Step by step, she said softly. Support one another, and even heavy burdens become manageable. Her presence shifted the atmosphere. Cooperation replaced confusion, patience replaced frustration, and a rhythm of work emerged among the villagers. The prince watched in quiet admiration, noticing how her gentle authority inspired action without demanding it. A young boy struggled to carry a heavy load of stones. The traveler approached, guiding his hands and steadying his balance. Courage is not the absence of fear, she said softly, but moving forward with care despite it. Hours passed as they worked together to restore the fence, mend broken gates, and clear debris from the paths. Each act was small yet deliberate, weaving together a sense of unity and accomplishment that transcended the physical repairs. Laughter and quiet conversation replaced the earlier tension, and even the most reluctant workers found themselves engaged and cooperative. When the task was complete, the travelers and villagers stepped back to admire the work. The fence stood strong, the paths clear, and the fields ready to withstand future storms. The travelers' satisfaction was quiet, rooted not in praise, but in witnessing the transformation of effort into harmony and purpose. On the journey back to the castle, the prince spoke thoughtfully. "You guide without ever forcing," he said. "People follow because they see what is right, not because they are commanded." The traveler smiled faintly. "True influence," she replied, "comes from steady, compassionate action, from seeing what is needed and responding without expectation of reward or recognition." That evening, in her chamber, she sat by the window as the first drops of evening rain began to patter gently against the glass. She reflected on the day, the subtle guidance, the patient instruction, and the quiet courage that had shaped every choice. And deep within the castle, the lesson continued to grow. Nobility is not a matter of rank or title, but of consistent, compassionate choices made in the small, unobserved moments that ripple outward, shaping the world and the hearts of all who witness them. The 25th day began under a muted dawn, the sky a soft gray that promised rain, and the air carried the crisp scent of wet earth and foliage. The castle lay quiet, the only sound the gentle dripping of water from the eaves and the faint rustle of leaves in the morning breeze. The traveler awoke with a sense of purpose, stretching slowly, savoring the calm and reflection that had become part of her routine. She dressed deliberately, smoothing the folds of her gown, and moved to the window to watch the world slowly come alive under the misty light. After breakfast, the queen approached with a measured gaze. "Today," she said, "you will accompany the prince to the riverbank. There are tasks to accomplish, but the true lesson lies in observing how empathy, patience, and steady guidance can transform a situation." The traveler nodded. "I am ready," she said quietly, her voice carrying the calm assurance that had grown from weeks of experience. The journey to the riverbank was serene yet challenging. The paths were slick with rain, puddles reflecting the gray sky above, and the soft murmur of water echoed through the trees. The traveler moved carefully, noting the uneven ground, the way branches drooped under the weight of rain, and the signs of struggle among the villagers gathered by the river. Upon arrival, they found villagers attempting to repair a small dam that had been weakened by storms. The water flowed swiftly, threatening to wash away tools and materials, and frustration was evident on the faces of the workers. The traveler stepped forward, kneeling beside the villagers to examine the damage. "Step by step," she said gently. "Work together, notice each weak point, and support one another. Even the strongest challenges are manageable when approached with care." Her presence immediately influenced the group. Cooperation replaced tension, calm replaced frustration, and a rhythm emerged in their work. The prince observed quietly, noting how her quiet guidance inspired respect and diligence without any demand. A young girl struggled to carry a heavy bucket of water to aid the repair. The traveler approached, guiding her hands and steadying the load. "Patience and courage," she said softly, "allow us to face challenges without fear, even when the path seems uncertain." Hours passed in steady, purposeful effort. The villagers repaired the dam, reinforced weak spots, and cleared debris from the surrounding banks. Each act, though small, contributed to a collective success, and laughter and conversation slowly replaced earlier tension. Even those initially doubtful of her guidance now worked willingly, inspired by her calm attention and steady example. When the repairs were complete, the villagers stepped back to admire their work. The river flowed more steadily, the banks were secure, and the sense of accomplishment radiated quietly among the group. The travelers' satisfaction was deep but unspoken, rooted in witnessing the transformation of effort into harmony and purpose. On the return journey to the castle, the prince spoke softly. "You lead without forcing, without demanding recognition," he said. "People follow because they see what is right and are inspired to act." The traveler smiled faintly. "True leadership," she replied, "is not measured by control or authority, but by steady, compassionate action, and by creating the space for others to act with courage and care." That evening, she sat by her window as the first evening rain began to fall. The gentle patter of drops against the glass, the soothing rhythm. She reflected on the day, the patience, the guidance, the quiet acts of courage, and the way consistent, compassionate action could transform not only tasks, but the hearts of those involved. And deep within the castle, a subtle truth continued to grow. Nobility is revealed not in titles or displays of power, but in the quiet, consistent choices that shape the world and the hearts of all who witness them, creating a legacy far deeper than stone or decree ever could. The 26th day began with a soft, silver light filtering through the clouds, casting a gentle glow over the castle and the surrounding gardens. The air was cool and carried the earthy scent of rain-soaked soil and blooming flowers. The traveler awoke quietly, stretching slowly, feeling the calm that had become part of her rhythm in the castle. She dressed deliberately, smoothing the folds of her gown, and moved to the window to watch the morning unfold, listening to the faint whisper of the wind through the trees. After breakfast, the queen approached her with a calm, deliberate gaze. "Today," she said, "you will accompany the prince to the northern meadows. There are tasks to accomplish, but the true lesson lies in observing how kindness, patience, and attentive guidance can transform the smallest efforts into lasting results." The traveler nodded. "I understand," she said, her voice quiet yet firm, carrying the steady assurance that had grown through days of careful observation and action. The journey to the northern meadows was serene yet demanding. Paths were soft from recent rains, puddles reflected the gray sky above, and the fields stretched wide, dotted with villagers already engaged in tending crops, repairing fences, and guiding animals. The traveler's eyes moved constantly, noticing the smallest details: the bent branch that could trip a passerby, the animal that struggled to reach water, the children attempting to help without understanding how. Upon arrival, the travelers and villagers began work in earnest. The traveler moved calmly among them, offering hands where needed, guidance where instruction was required, and encouragement where spirits faltered. "Strength," she said softly to a young man struggling with a heavy load, "is not in forcing things to happen, but in knowing how to act with care and precision." The prince observed silently, taking note of her quiet influence. She did not demand respect or obedience. Her actions spoke for themselves. Cooperation, patience, and trust flowed naturally in her presence. A small girl struggled to herd a group of goats that had wandered near a fence. The traveler knelt beside her, guiding her movements gently. "Patience and persistence," she said, "allow us to achieve what seems impossible when done with care." Slowly, the girl managed to lead the animals back safely, her face lighting up with pride. Hours passed, the meadows slowly transforming under careful attention. Broken fences were repaired, crops tended, and the animals guided safely. Laughter and quiet conversation replaced earlier tension, and even those initially doubtful of the traveler's guidance began to follow her example willingly. When the work was complete, the travelers and villagers stepped back, admiring the fruits of their labor. Fields were orderly, fences secure, and animals safe. The traveler's satisfaction was quiet but profound, rooted in the knowledge that steady, compassionate action had created both tangible results and a shift in the hearts of those around her. On the journey back to the castle, the prince spoke softly. "Your guidance changes people without force," he said. "They follow because they see what is right, not because they are compelled to." She met his gaze with a gentle smile. "True influence," she said, "is demonstrated through consistent, compassionate action. It is not demanded, it is earned quietly, through attention, patience, and care." That evening, the traveler sat by her window, listening to the soft rhythm of rain returning to the world outside. She reflected on the day the small hands guided, the patience offered, the courage quietly nurtured, and the subtle transformation that had taken place in the hearts of those who had worked alongside her. And deep within the castle, the lesson grew stronger still. Nobility is revealed not through grand gestures or proclamations, but through quiet, consistent acts of courage, empathy, and steadfastness that ripple outward, shaping the world and the hearts of all who witness them. The 27th day dawned under a sky streaked with soft gray and gold, the aftermath of an early morning rain leaving the castle and its gardens glistening with moisture. The air carried the clean, earthy scent of wet stone and flowering plants, mingling with the faint aroma of freshly baked bread from the kitchens below. The traveler awoke quietly, stretching slowly, feeling the steady calm that had become familiar over her days in the castle. She dressed deliberately, smoothing the folds of her gown, and moved to the window to watch the first hints of sunlight touch the castle walls. After breakfast, the queen approached with a composed expression. "Today," she said, "you will accompany the prince to the central village. There are small tasks to complete, but the true lesson lies in observing how quiet guidance and empathy shape communities." The traveler nodded. "I understand," she said, her voice calm, carrying the quiet authority she had cultivated through weeks of experience and attention. The journey to the village was gentle yet instructive. The paths were slick from lingering dew, puddles reflecting the pale morning light, and the faint chatter of villagers could be heard as they moved about their early tasks. The traveler moved attentively, noticing small details: a child struggling to lift a basket, a roof slightly sagging under wet tiles, a tree branch drooping near a path. She paused to offer help or guidance whenever it was needed. Upon arriving, they found the villagers working to repair a communal well that had been damaged in a recent storm. The water had risen dangerously close to the edge, and tension ran high among the workers. The traveler knelt beside them, her voice soft but steady. Step carefully. Support one another. Even when a task seems overwhelming, patience and cooperation can achieve what force cannot. Her presence immediately calmed the group. Confusion gave way to order, frustration to collaboration. The prince watched silently, noting how her quiet, attentive guidance inspired people to act not out of obligation, but out of respect and trust. A small boy attempted to carry a pail of water, his arms trembling. The traveler approached, steadying his hands and guiding him. Courage, she said gently, is not the absence of fear, but moving forward with care despite it. Slowly, the boy managed to carry the water safely, his face lighting up with pride. Hours passed as they worked to secure the well, repair surrounding structures, and restore the village paths. Laughter and quiet conversation began to fill the space, replacing earlier tension and creating a sense of accomplishment and harmony. Even those who had initially resisted guidance now worked willingly, inspired by the traveler's steady presence and quiet example. When the repairs were complete, the travelers and villagers stepped back to admire their combined efforts. The well was secure, the paths clear, and the village seemed to hum with a newfound energy. The traveler's satisfaction was quiet but deep, rooted in witnessing not only the tangible results, but the subtle shift in the hearts of those she had guided. On the journey back to the castle, the prince spoke softly. "You influence without forcing anyone's hand," he said. "People follow because they see what is right, not because they are commanded." The traveler smiled faintly. "True influence," she replied, "is demonstrated through consistent, compassionate action. It is not demanded, it is quietly earned, through care, patience, and attention to what matters most." That evening, she sat by her window, listening to the soft rhythm of evening rain tapping against the panes. She reflected on the day, the patient guidance, the courage nurtured, the small acts of care that had rippled outward, and the subtle transformation in the village. And within the castle, a quiet truth continued to take root: nobility is not measured by title or ceremony, but by the steady, compassionate choices that shape the world, touch hearts, and create a legacy far deeper than stone or proclamation ever could. The 20th day began under a sky heavy with mist and low-hanging clouds, the castle and its surroundings shrouded in a soft gray light. The scent of wet earth and blooming flowers lingered in the air, mingling with the faint aroma of wood smoke from the hearths below. The traveler awoke quietly, stretching slowly, savoring the calm of the morning that had become a part of her rhythm. She dressed carefully, smoothing her gown, and moved to the window to watch the gardens glisten under the lingering moisture, droplets hanging delicately on leaves and flowers. After breakfast, the queen approached her, her expression calm but purposeful. "Today," she said, "you will accompany the prince to the hillside village. There are tasks to complete, but the true lesson lies in observing how attention, empathy, and gentle guidance can shape not only outcomes, but hearts." The traveler nodded. "I understand," she said, her voice steady and quiet, carrying the assurance born from weeks of careful observation and compassionate action. The journey to the hillside village was peaceful yet demanding. Paths were muddy, stones slick from the rains, and the soft murmur of streams accompanied the travelers as they walked. The traveler's eyes moved constantly, noticing subtle dangers: a branch hanging too low, a puddle too deep for a small child, a roof weakened by water. She guided the prince and the villagers carefully, demonstrating patience and awareness with every step. Upon arrival, they found villagers struggling to repair a small bridge that connected the village to the nearby fields. The water beneath ran fast and cold, and the boards were warped and unstable. Frustration rippled through the group, but the traveler knelt beside them, her voice gentle yet firm. Step slowly. Notice the weakest points. Support each other. Even when the task seems daunting, calm attention can achieve what force cannot. Her presence immediately brought order to the chaos. Confusion gave way to cooperation. Tension gave way to steady determination. The prince watched silently, absorbing the lesson in quiet influence. Leadership does not demand obedience. It inspires it through example. A young boy attempted to carry a plank across the muddy ground, but struggled under its weight. The traveler knelt beside him, steadying the board and guiding his hands. Courage, she said softly, is acting with care despite fear or difficulty. Strength grows from patience, not from haste. The boy managed to move the plank safely, his face lighting up with pride and relief. Hours passed in steady, purposeful work. The villagers repaired the bridge, cleared debris, and reinforced surrounding paths. Laughter and quiet conversation gradually replaced earlier frustration, and even the most hesitant workers joined willingly, inspired by the traveler's calm, consistent guidance. When the bridge was finally secure, the villagers stepped back, admiring the results of their combined effort. The water flowed steadily beneath the structure, and a sense of accomplishment radiated quietly through the group. The traveler's satisfaction was unspoken but deep, rooted in witnessing both tangible success and the subtle shift in the hearts of those around her. On the journey back to the castle, the prince spoke softly. You guide without demanding. People follow because they see what is right, not because they are told to. The traveler smiled faintly. True influence, she replied, comes not from authority or titles, but from steady, compassionate action, from showing care, patience, and courage in every moment, especially when no one is watching. That evening, she sat by her window, listening to the gentle rhythm of rain tapping against the panes. She reflected on the day, the patient guidance, the courage nurtured, the small acts of care that had rippled outward, and felt the quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing that true nobility lies in consistent, compassionate choices that touch hearts, shape lives, and leave a lasting, unseen legacy. And within the castle walls, that lesson continued to grow, invisible yet undeniable, shaping the hearts of all who lived there, and leaving a quiet imprint of courage, patience, and empathy that could never be measured in stone or proclamation. The 29th day began under a soft, silver light, the sky heavy with clouds that hinted at rain yet again. The castle lay quiet, the gardens glistening with droplets from the early morning mist. The air carried the faint scent of wet earth and blossoms, a gentle, calming reminder of renewal and growth. The traveler awoke quietly, stretching slowly, savoring the serenity of the morning and the steady rhythm that had settled over her days. She dressed deliberately, smoothing the folds of her gown, and moved to the window to watch the world gradually come alive. After breakfast, the queen approached, her expression composed yet purposeful. Today, she said, you will accompany the prince to the eastern village. There are tasks to be completed, But the real lesson is in seeing how small acts of care, patience, and guidance can create lasting change. The traveler nodded. I understand, she said, her voice calm and measured, carrying the quiet authority born from weeks of experience and careful attention. The journey to the village was serene but demanding. Paths were still slick from earlier rains, puddles reflected the muted sky, and the soft rustle of leaves and distant birdsong accompanied their walk. The traveler's eyes moved constantly, noticing subtle details: a branch bent low under water, a child struggling to carry a basket, a corner of a roof weakened by storms. She paused frequently to guide or assist, her presence steady and reassuring. Upon arrival, they found villagers attempting to repair a small communal barn that had been damaged in the recent storms. The structure leaned precariously, and tension was evident among those working to restore it. The traveler knelt beside the group, her voice gentle but firm. Step carefully. Work together. Notice the weakest points and support one another. Even the heaviest tasks become manageable when approached with patience and care. Her influence was immediate. Frustration gave way to cooperation, confusion to rhythm, and even the most hesitant workers began to follow her example willingly. The prince observed quietly, learning how guidance through presence, empathy, and steady action can inspire trust and commitment. A young boy struggled to carry a heavy beam. The traveler approached, steadying his hands and helping him balance the weight. Courage, she said softly, is not the absence of fear, but moving forward with care despite it. Slowly, the boy managed to place the beam safely, his face lighting up with pride and relief. Hours passed as they repaired the barn, reinforced the surrounding structures, and cleared debris from the yard. Laughter and quiet conversation gradually replaced earlier tension, and a sense of harmony emerged among the villagers. Every small act of guidance and support had created a ripple effect, transforming both the work and the hearts of those involved. When the barn was finally secure, the villagers stepped back to admire their efforts. The traveler's satisfaction was quiet but profound, rooted in seeing the tangible results and the subtle shifts in trust, cooperation, and confidence among the villagers. On the journey back to the castle, the prince spoke softly. You guide without demanding, and yet people follow. They are inspired by what they see, not compelled by orders. The traveler smiled faintly. True influence, she said, is not achieved through authority or recognition, but through consistent, compassionate action through the courage, care, and patience we show in every moment, especially when no one is watching. That evening, she sat by her window, listening to the soft patter of rain against the glass, reflecting on the day, the patient guidance, the courage nurtured, the small acts of care that had rippled outward and shaped not only the barn, but the hearts of those who had worked beside her. And deep within the castle walls, a quiet truth continued to grow. Nobility is revealed not through title or ceremony, but through the steady, compassionate choices that shape the world, touch hearts, and leave a legacy far more enduring than stone or proclamation ever could. The 30th day dawned under a pale, golden light that broke through the lingering clouds, casting the castle and its surroundings in a soft, radiant glow. The garden sparkled with dew, the air was cool and fragrant with wet earth and blossoms, and a gentle breeze carried the distant murmur of flowing water from the nearby stream. The traveler awoke quietly, stretching slowly, feeling the calm and reflection that had become part of her daily rhythm. She dressed with deliberate care, smoothing her gown and letting herself savor the quiet moments before the day began. After breakfast, the queen approached, her gaze calm but deliberate. "Today," she said, "you will accompany the prince to the castle grounds and the nearby village. This is the final day of your lessons and observations. The work is important, yes, but the true purpose is to see how all the lessons, the patience, the courage, the empathy, and the quiet guidance come together." The traveler nodded, her expression serene. "I understand," she said, her voice calm and steady, carrying the assurance and experience built over weeks of careful observation and consistent action. The journey to the village was serene yet purposeful. Paths were still damp from the previous night's rain, puddles reflected the soft morning light, and birdsong mingled with the distant chatter of villagers beginning their day. The traveler's eyes moved constantly, noticing small details: a branch that threatened to fall, a child struggling to carry a basket, an old fence leaning precariously, and she addressed each with quiet guidance, helping and instructing where necessary. Upon arrival, they found villagers gathered to repair and organize communal spaces, the small marketplace, the pathways between cottages, and the schoolhouse where children learned. The structures had endured storms, and the villagers worked with earnest determination, but lacked coordination. The traveler knelt beside them, her voice gentle yet firm. "Observe each other. Work together. Notice what is fragile, and support it. Even the heaviest burdens become manageable when approached with care and cooperation." Her presence transformed the space. Confusion gave way to order, frustration to rhythm, and even the most hesitant workers found themselves moving with purpose. The prince observed quietly, absorbing the lesson in leadership that comes not from command, but from influence through example, patience, and empathy. A young boy struggled to carry a load of firewood to the schoolhouse. The traveler approached, steadying his hands and helping him balance it. "Courage," she said softly, "is acting with care despite fear or difficulty. Strength grows from patience and attention, not from force." Slowly, the boy succeeded, his face bright with pride and accomplishment. Hours passed in steady, purposeful labor. Fences were repaired, paths cleared, communal spaces organized, and the villagers began to move with quiet coordination and harmony. Laughter and conversation replaced tension, and every small act of guidance rippled outward, transforming not only the work itself, but the spirit of the community. When the tasks were completed, the travelers and villagers stepped back to admire the results. The marketplace was orderly, the schoolhouse secure, the paths clear, and the sense of accomplishment was tangible. The traveler's satisfaction was quiet but deep, rooted in seeing the combination of effort, care, and empathy yield tangible results and subtle shifts in the hearts of those she had guided. On the journey back to the castle, the prince spoke softly, almost reverently. "You lead without demanding, without commanding. People follow because they see what is right, not because they are forced to." The traveler smiled faintly, her gaze thoughtful. "True influence," she said, "is demonstrated through steady, compassionate action. It is earned through patience, care, and courage shown in every moment, especially when no one is watching." That evening, she returned to her chamber and sat by the window, listening to the soft rhythm of rain beginning again, reflecting on the culmination of all the day's lessons: the patience cultivated, the courage nurtured, the empathy extended, and the small, consistent acts of care that had rippled outward to touch lives, hearts, and communities. And deep within the castle, a quiet truth settled fully into the stone and air: nobility and true greatness are revealed not through titles, crowns, or recognition, but through the consistent, compassionate choices made in the quiet, unobserved moments of life. These acts shape the world, touch hearts, and leave a legacy far more enduring and profound than any proclamation ever could. The traveler closed her eyes, a sense of fulfillment washing over her, knowing that in guiding with patience, empathy, and quiet courage, she had helped create a world where care, attention, and love mattered most, and that lesson would live on in the hearts of all who had witnessed it. The final day dawned with an ethereal light, soft and golden, spilling over the castle and bathing the gardens in a tranquil glow. The air was calm, carrying the gentle scent of wet earth and blooming flowers, mingling with the faint murmur of streams and the rustle of leaves stirred by a soft morning breeze. The traveler awoke slowly, savoring the serenity that had grown familiar over the weeks, stretching deliberately and feeling the quiet weight of reflection settle upon her. This was the day when all lessons, all experiences, and all subtle transformations would converge. After breakfast, the queen approached, her expression serene but filled with quiet authority. "Today," she said, "you will witness the culmination of all that has been learned. The prince, the villagers, and the castle itself will reveal what true nobility, courage, and empathy can achieve when guided by patience and careful action. Observe, reflect, and understand the full measure of what you have shared and experienced." The traveler nodded, her eyes calm, carrying the quiet assurance born of countless days spent in reflection, guidance, and action. "I understand," she said, her voice steady, resonating with the inner certainty that comes from knowing one has done what is right, even in the smallest of moments. The castle grounds were alive with movement. Villagers and castle workers alike had gathered, engaging in the daily rhythms of tending gardens, repairing structures, guiding animals, and preparing for the day's communal activities. But something different lingered in the air: a sense of harmony, of cooperation, of lives subtly but deeply influenced by patience, courage, and empathy. The traveler moved among them quietly, her eyes observing the small details: a child carefully balancing a basket of flowers, an elder guiding younger workers with gentle instruction, the prince lending a hand without hesitation or pride. Every action seemed to echo the lessons of the past weeks: steady guidance, compassionate patience, and courage expressed through care rather than force. A small girl approached, carrying a basket of freshly harvested fruit. She stumbled on a stone, and instinctively, the traveler reached out, steadying her gently. "Even the smallest acts matter," she said softly. "And care, when given freely, creates courage in others." The girl's eyes brightened, and she continued on her way, a little stronger, a little more confident. The prince watched closely, moving among the villagers with growing understanding. He had witnessed all that the traveler had demonstrated over the past days: the quiet strength, the subtle influence, the courage nurtured through care. Now, he applied these lessons himself, guiding, encouraging, and observing with a gentleness that spoke of a leader who had learned to lead not through authority, but through example. The morning passed in a rhythm of cooperation and quiet accomplishment. Paths were cleared, fences repaired, gardens tended, and the villagers worked with an energy and joy that had not been there before. Even the smallest gestures, a smile, a helping hand, a word of encouragement carried weight, creating ripples of trust and empathy that bound the community together in ways both tangible and invisible. By midday, the traveler and the prince stood on a hill overlooking the castle and village, the sun breaking through the clouds to cast a golden glow on the land. The traveler spoke softly, her voice carrying both reflection and certainty. All of this, the cooperation, the courage, the care, was not born of orders or commands. It came from steady, compassionate action, from patience, empathy, and the courage to act rightly when no one was watching. The prince nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "I understand now," he said. "True nobility is not in titles or crowns. It is in the choices we make quietly, consistently, and with care. Leadership, courage, and strength are revealed through action, not proclamation." As the sun set, the castle and village glowed in the warm light, a testament to the quiet, persistent influence of kindness, patience, and courage. The traveler walked through the grounds one last time, observing the subtle harmony, the gentle smiles, the laughter, and the quiet satisfaction of lives touched and hearts transformed. That evening, she returned to her chamber, seated by the window as rain began again, gentle and rhythmic, tapping softly against the glass. She reflected on the entirety of the journey, the lessons learned, the courage nurtured, the patience extended, and the quiet acts of care that had rippled outward, touching every corner of the castle and village. And in that moment, the truth revealed itself fully: nobility, greatness, and lasting impact are not measured in recognition, wealth, or titles, but in the quiet, consistent choices made with empathy, courage, and care. These choices shape lives, touch hearts, and leave a legacy that endures far beyond stone walls or royal decrees. The traveler closed her eyes, a profound sense of fulfillment washing over her. She knew that the ripples of her guidance, patience, and compassion would continue to grow, invisible yet undeniable, shaping the world in ways that were gentle, enduring, and true. And thus, the story concluded not with a grand proclamation, but with the quiet, steady triumph of virtue, patience, and empathy, leaving behind a legacy far deeper than words, a truth that would live in the hearts of all who had witnessed it, and in the spirit of the prince who had learned the true meaning of nobility.